Hello and welcome to the Ferraris. Today I'm going to take you through my 10 tips and tricks on how to buy your next appreciating classic. These tips will allow you to buy right, drive well, and hopefully sell at a profit. I've used these same methods to buy and sell over 80 or 90 cars now. I've lost count, but I've enjoyed it and I've done pretty well on it, and I'm here to share those all with you. And if you like what I'm saying, please like, subscribe, let me know if I'm out to lunch. If you disagree, I'd love to hear it all. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into it. Number one, low production numbers. This is probably the most important one on the list, okay? If a car has many brethren, then it's very likely going to be easier to find and harder to sell. And I'll tell you why. Because when it comes time for you to sell your car, somebody's going to come along and they're going to be 80 or 90% interested, and they're going to say, this would have been a great car, but it's got green leather instead of gray leather, or it's red instead of brown, or it's an 88 instead of a 90. I really wanted a 90. And for some seemingly arbitrary small reason, they're going to rule your car out. Or it's just not going to show up in the searches that, the pre-categorized searches that AutoTrader and other sites have. They'll just rule it out because there's so many other options. When they can't find what they're looking for, they broaden their options, and then your car's going to show up. So if you have a low production number car, you're likely to take advantage of scarcity when it comes time to sell. Of course, it's going to take longer to buy, but that's what you have to do. You have to invest the time, and you will get paid handsomely in the future if you do that. Okay? Number two, and this is a contentious one, but I believe a car that is poorly received in period often has the potential to be an appreciating classic. And I'll give you a specific example. In the 1990s, the A3 Supra was the top dog of twin-turbo V6 cars. Beautiful, rounded bars, so really fast, et cetera, Toyota, well-engineered. And as a result, the prices are astronomical these days. But what are its contemporaries? The 300ZX, the 3000 GT, these are all beautiful cars as well. Similar levels of horsepower, similar levels of performance, perhaps not quite as good. But the value that these cars have is, percentages of the Supra, because everyone fixates on the Supra. Yet they're going to give you substantively the same experience for a lot less money. So, you can look at that and say, this is a slept-on classic. Maybe it's not as good as a Supra, but it's a third of the price. So you can have 80% of the experience for 30% of the price. And the ceiling of value has not been reached yet, because the ceiling of value has been established by what the Supra is selling for. And if this is selling for 30%, there's still a wide gradient, and there's a chance that it's going to come up in the future. And in the interim, you continue to drive it. So sometimes that is a hack. It's not strictly true for everything, but it's something to think about. Number three, any collectible car needs a standout piece of engineering or design or manufacturing that makes it special, okay? You take for example, a W124 Mercedes 500E versus 400E. Okay, they are pretty much the same car. They are exactly the same car. The engine's a little bit bigger, there's a few more horsepower, but they're the same bloody car. Yet, the 500E can reach 500 grand. Yet a 400E, you'll get one for 15 or 20 grand. For 50 or 30 horsepower difference, and essentially the same car. What makes the 500E special? Well, it was built on the Porsche assembly line, and it's 2 inches wider, or the track is a little bit wider. 2 or 3 tiny little differences that made it much, much more special than the 400E, which is the same car. But because it's got this story of being manufactured on a Porsche line rather than a Mercedes line, and because it's got a couple little extra horsepower and so on, people gravitate towards that, and they pay outsized premiums to have that. So I don't know, is a 400E a slept-on bargain? Perhaps, perhaps not, depends what you're looking for. But the 500E or some equivalent that has not been fully explored, when you have a narrative that tells the next buyer why it's so special, that's more likely to motivate them to buy, because they're like, well, that's hard to replicate. A Mercedes built on a Porsche line, that doesn't happen very often. Something to think about. Number four, you want to buy something with mid-miles. And I think one of the big mistakes people make is they focus on really low miles. Low miles are great, and low mile cars can often appreciate, and they can outdo the market potentially. But when I talk about an appreciating classic, I mean appreciating this appreciating classic. And appreciating a classic means you want to drive it. And a low mile car, you just can't drive because you're costing yourself just too much money per mile, so you're not going to do it. It de-incentivizes you to enjoy the car. And if you're doing that, well, then you're just maintaining it and you're just maybe looking at it in your garage and you're not driving it. And if you're going to do that, you may as well have real estate because then you can just look at the real estate, buy it and sell it. It's a commodity. If you're looking at a car as a commodity, low mile cars are great. But if you're looking at a car to buy at a reasonable price, drive a reasonable amount, and make a reasonable margin, a mid-mile car is the way to go. Something with 40,000 miles, for example, you could easily bump that up to 45. There's no value difference, okay? But if you have a 10,000 mile car, more sensitive. And conversely, if you have a 100,000 mile car or 95,000 mile car and you get it up to 102, that's only 7,000 miles, but it's a big difference in people's minds. So there are psychological boundaries that you can exploit, okay? And even when you look at Auto Trader, you look at, there are margins, you know, for under 50,000 miles, under a certain value, under this, whatever. So people, you know, a car that has 99,000 miles will show up in your search, whereas a car with 101,000 miles might not. So, you know, a mid-mile car or the mileage number specifically is something to be considered, depending on how much or little you're going to use a car. But I personally think a mid-mile car is the best way to maximize the usage versus value versus saleability quotient. So number 5, how many owners? Well, you don't want a car with 50 owners, okay? Because each one of them, you know, it starts like this. When you have an expensive car like this M5, for example, it started out with a guy who had a certain amount of money, okay? And then he drove it for a bit, and then he sold it to a guy who wanted a new one perhaps, but couldn't find one, couldn't pay for it, and had less money. So he's got less money to maintain it and to drive it, okay, and to, you know, operate it. And then he drives it for a bit and then sells it to a guy who is stretching to get into this car, or he's going to buy something lesser. Then he buys this and he's got less money and therefore less money for maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's not strictly true, but I believe it to be true, okay? That's not to say you should hunt only for one owner cars, although if you find one of those, they're great. But, you know, several owners is a reasonable consideration, and what you want to know is the owner has had the car for long time periods, because even if that owner doesn't have the records, more than likely they took it to one place. So if you're committed enough, you can go and chase down the records for a car because you know that it's a Porsche 997 Turbo and it lived in Calgary for 6 years. And although that owner at that time didn't have any records, there's only a couple of shops that can service these cars. So with 3 or 4 calls, potentially you could track down the records and enhance the value. Okay, so numbers of owners, not the strongest point, but something to consider when you've had multiple owners, because that implies maybe there's a problem with the car, maybe it's not been as well maintained, the records are going to be scattered, it's going to be moved around the country or the world, as it may be, and none of those things are ideal. So just something to keep in mind. Number 6, accident history. And this is not, I'm not going to get at this the way you think I am, perhaps. Accident history is important, but not for the reasons you think it is. It is incredibly easy to rack up a pretty high bill on a car today with minor damage, okay? With laser adaptive headlights, sensors, bumpers, everything is ridiculously expensive. So to get a huge bill, a repair bill on say something like a Ferrari is very easy. I'll give you my own personal example. I had a 458 that had a parking lot scrape, okay? And I'm literally a parking lot scrape. And the Carfax report showed that it was a $50,000 claim. How is that possible? Well, it turns out that the small scrape was attached to a diffuser that they refused to paint, and they had to sell you the whole diffuser, and the diffuser was back ordered from Italy, and so you had to have a rental car for 6 months to wait for this part to come in, and the rental car cost is all being added towards your Carfax bill. And there was, the part was like 30 grand, when right now used on eBay, you could probably find one for 1,500. So there's all kinds of inflation that goes into it. And at the end of it, the next user says, oh my God, there's a $50,000 claim on this thing. Oh, this is going to be garbage. It's probably wrecked. No, you have to investigate the accident. And maybe the frame is twisted. Maybe it's a shit box. You never know. But it may be something like this. So when you see previous accident in the history, don't just turn off. Have a look at it, kick the tires, see what the issue was. because maybe there's a bargain there. And again, it comes down to usability. Yes, you're going to have to explain that accident when you sell the car, but at least you're going to have a reasonable narrative, whereas the previous owner didn't investigate, doesn't know, doesn't care, and is just going to take the financial penalty. You can exploit that and potentially use it to your advantage in the interim, knowing that you're driving a safe, beautifully well-maintained car otherwise. I know of a Ferrari 488 that was a total write-off because somebody had gone into the car and slashed the leather with a razor. I don't know what the owner did to deserve that. I can speculate, but I won't here. But anyways, the leather was cut. And as a result, the car was a rebuild. That's stupid, right? The car has never been apart. It's got the original leather. There's still the hash marks in the leather. But somebody sees rebuilt on the title, says, nope, it's not worth anything. It's garbage. If you're looking for a user experience, well, you can drive that car with or without the cut leather. And when the time comes, you can either replace the leather or tell the next owner, this is the issue. It's never been hit. All the sensors are factory original. There is no structural issue. Yet most people refuse to entertain that sort of a car. Some of my biggest turnarounds have been on cars that have some degree of story that I have investigated deeper than the average person. And as a result, I found a deal to be had where others have walked by. Number 7, you're looking for a car that's hard to find. Where can you look? Well, you look, well, you know what? There's nothing in St. Louis. I guess I can't find the car if you live in St. Louis, for example. But no, if it's a rare car, you got to look broader than that. You got to look in the country. Failing the country, you got to look at the continent. Failing the continent, you got to look in the whole world. It's a world market, folks. You can buy a car from anywhere these days. It's not hard. And in one of my other videos, I talk about importing a car from Japan. And while that process may be specific to Japan, it's not that much different to bring something from Europe or South America. All the big collectors, that's what they do. They hunt in these markets that have not been fully exploited, where the value of the cars is depressed because maybe there's a language difference, or maybe it's difficult to find these things, or the marketing strategies are different. There are opportunities there, especially if you're looking for a rare mark or a rare color or a rare spec. That's where you can really make up the time and find yourself a bargain. I certainly have done it. In fact, I featured one of the cars, my 612 I brought from Japan. It has a very rare spec, and for whatever reason, it was a bargain. So I snapped it up, and you can too if you look right. Okay. Number 8, and this kind of is along the same lines, rare options. If you know your car, if you know your quarry very well, you may know that certain options are desirable versus not desirable. For example, going back to a 968. In 1992 or 3 or whatever year they started, and the Deutschmark was strong, and the 968 was too expensive. So German, the car makers, Porsche at that time decided, how can we sell more of these cars? Well, let's decrease the price. We'll decontent the car, we'll make it cheaper, and we'll sell it. And we'll put lipstick on a pig, and we'll call it a club sport. A sporty car, sporty connotation. And so that car sold cheaper than the standard car. Yet the Club Sport now is the car to have. Decontented. God knows why. So if you find one that has things missing, or it looks, have a little look deeper. Maybe this is a rare package. Maybe this is something desirable. Because in this day of information that's available to everyone at the touch of a button, people know their prey very well. And there are aficionados of every shape and description in the car world that will tell you the minutia of their model that will make your ears bleed. Okay, so if you're lucky enough to find that car that has the rare option, it may be a poorly known or little known fact that you can exploit. Number 9, stale listings. There are many people out there who think their car is worth more than it is. I would say the majority. Okay, this is why dealers are in existence. Because if private sellers were more realistic about how to, what their car was actually worth and how to sell it, there would be no need to pay dealer markups and taxes and so on that go along with dealer buys. Okay, but they do exist because most people overvalue their cars. That's just the way it is. But what you may find is somebody who's asking above the market, and that listing has been there for months. Okay, That person, maybe you want to do a soft approach. And I'm not saying lowball. Don't be an ass and, offer them 30 cents on the dollar. Come up with a reason, come up with a number, say, look, I noticed you're listing, I'm really interested in the car. I noticed you're asking why. I would offer you X, and this is my reason. This is the comparable. I did this recently on a Lamborghini. There's one available, and the guy was asking 100 grand over the market, and I said, look, this is, I don't want to insult you, but this is what I would be willing to pay. And he's like, show me another listing. That's BS. And then I showed him the other listing, and I said, the reason I prefer your car is X, Y, Z, but there is this other one available. And he went radio silent. So he wasn't willing to deal. But his car has been listed now for the last year. In that case, not a success. But it could be a success for you. Talking sense into people. And some people just reach their threshold of I'm done with this car and I'll just take the next reasonable offer that comes along. And who knows, that could be you. So don't be an ass. Be respectful. Give them reasons for why you're coming up with a number. But if you do that, you're going to potentially find yourself a bargain. And finally, and this is a little bit of a left field one, but I think that is relevant. Look at the provenance of your car. Okay. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean by that, where does your car sit in the collective psyche? Social, what is the social awareness of your car? And I'll give you an example. Everyone knows what a Diablo is because maybe they watched Dumb and Dumber. If they're of a certain age, they remember an orange Diablo. That was a retina-searing car. And, Diablos have been featured in other cars, so they have a certain presence in the market. Whereas a contemporary of the Diablo, the 512 TR, you barely ever saw them in the movies. Maybe you saw Testarossa in Miami Vice, but not a 512 TR. Similar cars, Diablo brings more money because it's better known. The 550 is another example. In one of my other clips, I talk about the 575 as an investment classic. And in that clip, I use its feature length chase in the Bad Boys movie. A good car chase can really sell a car. If anybody remembers Ronin or Bullet or all these other, there are many car movies out there, and we might talk about that one day. But let's take the example of Bullet. Okay, so that green Mustang followed by the black Chargers in that Steve McQueen Bullet movie. A green Mustang to this day with that package, which even though it was a relatively standard, package then, if you find a green one like that, it's going to be worth more. What to talk of the actual Bullet Mustang, which is, essentially priceless. So the fact that it's been in the movie, that is burned into a whole generation of movie watchers, is going to make it more desirable to those people. So you can exploit that and know that a car that has a larger than life presence in social awareness can make you some money down the road. So have a think about that, and thank you for joining. Like, subscribe. Tell me what you found. Tell me what cars you're kicking the tires on. I'd love to hear it. I'm an enthusiast. I don't get paid to do this. I'm just out there enjoying myself. Hopefully you are too, and hopefully these tips help. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.